What should you know before you start studying for the MCAT? The MCAT is one of the most academically stressful times for many students. So I made it my job to learn as much as possible about this 7.5-hour standardized exam. After researching resources and tips from students like you, some of whom started with scores in the 400s but made small but steady improvements in order to score 515 plus on test day, there are so many things I want to share with you that will hopefully make your journey so much easier. Time is of the essence, so let's get right into it. First, let's talk about studying effectively. The MCAT isn't your typical test, and it's likely different from any test you've ever taken before. Most people think they know how to study for the MCAT, but many get it wrong. Even if you're a 4.0 straight A student, you'll probably want to consider a different approach if you want to make studying as effective as possible. I'm a big fan of showing what doesn't work so you can get a clearer picture of what does work. So let's say you want an ineffective way to study for the MCAT. What would that look like? You'd passively read through your prep books and maybe highlight a few sentences here and there, but this typically doesn't work well. How do I know? Well, let's do a quick test. Do you remember what I said 3 sentences ago? Probably not, because naturally most people are just passively watching this video. I'd be surprised if anyone clicked on this video to try and study it and retain the information for some big test. But this passive method is typically how someone who wants to study ineffectively would try to do it. Now, if you wanted to effectively study for the MCAT, you'd turn to our good old friends, active recall and spaced repetition. Try Anki flashcards to actively learn and test your knowledge. You've likely heard of Anki if you've ever gone through pre-med forums talking about the MCAT or watched other videos about the MCAT. There are many ways to practice active recall and spaced repetition effectively. I won't go into the nitty-gritty of what these are in this particular video, but basically, active recall is when you study by retrieving information from your memory. Spaced repetition is when you study information over multiple study sessions, thus resetting the forgetting curve rather than having one intensive session. This helps you to better retain information. There's plenty of science that backs both. For example, say you're using Anki flashcards. You might quiz yourself on a question like, the main inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain is... Questions like these force you to try to actively retrieve information from your brain, so it's easier to summon it in the future. Now, what's great about Anki is that it does the dirty work and figures out what days to show you particular flashcards based on the concept of spaced repetition. One pro tip is to upgrade your flashcards as you study to make more challenging questions as you go. For example, say you have one simple question about glycolysis and another simple question about the Krebs cycle. You've quizzed yourself on these questions and you've gotten them right 3 times in a row, so you can feel pretty confident that you know the material. You could then combine these into a higher order question, say about what would happen to levels of NADH or ATP if you were to remove certain substrates from these pathways. Of course, you shouldn't completely rely on flashcards as your only study method, but they do incorporate retrieval practice, which is key to your MCAT learning system. By the way, I've compiled some effective and high-yield MCAT study resources, including Anki flashcard decks. If you want to learn more, links are in the description if you want to check that out. Next, I want to talk about learning from your mistakes. Learning from your mistakes is one of the most effective ways to learn. So much so that in Agile methodology, which is a project management approach, there's a phrase that says, fail fast, fail often. Apple, IBM, Microsoft, even Panera Bread are among the companies that have used this methodology for its efficiency, how it keeps people motivated, and speed at getting a faster result. So how can you harness this to make your MCAT prep as effective and quick as possible? Picture 2 types of students, student A and student B. When student A would review the questions that he got wrong, he'd basically acknowledge the right answer and quickly move on. Sure, it seemed like a fast way to do things, but he noticed that when he did this, he would keep making the same mistake over and over and over again. Now, student B does things differently. She reviews the question carefully. In fact, she read somewhere that, as a general rule of thumb, you should expect it to take about twice as long to review a question as it took to complete it. Bottom line, quality matters. You need to ask, why did I make this mistake? Was it a content knowledge gap? Did I misunderstand a diagram or a graph? Did I misunderstand the question or passage? Maybe it was a careless error. Were you stuck between 2 possible answers? The whole idea is that you want to spot the trends. If you're making more mistakes in one area versus another, you know where to start fine-tuning. For example, if you find you're making a lot of content mistakes in the organic chemistry section, you probably want to read up on those sections again. Or if you're making a lot of silly, careless mistakes because you're rushing through, then that might be a hint and to be more intentional about reading through the question more carefully to make sure you understand what it's asking. Now, this is directly related to my next tip, which is try, track, and tune. In other words, try a method, track to see if it's working, and tune as needed. Quick story time before I get to the meat and potatoes of this tip. I've been following this author, Mark Manson, for some time now. He's a 3-time #1 New York Times best-selling author and self-proclaimed writer of self-help for people who hate self-help. I caught one of his interviews the other day where he was talking about how he lost 60 pounds and what it took to get there. He says that a lot of people have been asking him what's his secret to losing all of that weight. And all he can muster up is this unsatisfactory answer, which is essentially he tried a bunch of different things and stuck with what worked. So when it comes to studying for the MCAT, be open to trying new things. Now, I'm not talking about running a marathon while doing practice problems. I'm talking about trying new strategies. Here's an example. Remember student A and student B from earlier in the video? Well, both were struggling with the cars section of the exam. Both started using the typical method that they saw in one of their prep books. Read the passage, jot down the main idea of the paragraph until you have essentially an outline of every single paragraph. Jot down the main idea of each paragraph until you have a simple outline. Then write a brief summary of the main idea of the whole passage using that outline. But there was an issue. Using this method, both students kept running out of time and getting the answers wrong. Here's where they did things differently. Student A kept trying to make it work. After all, maybe it just takes some getting used to, and if the top scorers swear by it and all the prep books say that it works, then it must work. It must be the best way to study. 4 weeks later, he was stuck at the same spot where he started. Now, student B tried something different. Since the initial strategy wasn't working, she tried something else instead. She read through the entire passage to get a quick idea of what it was about, then answered each question in order. Eureka! That worked much better. Student B was getting fewer and fewer questions wrong, and with some minor tuning, she was able to complete each passage more quickly. There are different strategies that work better or worse depending on which section of the MCAT you're studying. Some are more reliant on memorization, while others are more about overall comprehension. Maybe I should make a video about different strategies and how they work. Let me know in the comments. Another thing to keep in mind is the MCAT is one of those tests with so many resources available. This is both good and bad. It's good because you have your pick of resources. For example, if you try reading one prep book and it's just not sinking in, you could always try watching a video from this Filipino YouTuber and all of a sudden everything might just click. Or you could even work with someone to help you understand better. But having too many resources can also have its drawbacks because it can be so overwhelming. I remember going on Amazon to find myself a new pair of headphones, and seeing dozens to hundreds of different possible options was so overwhelming I almost didn't get myself a new pair of headphones at all. The analysis paralysis was almost too much. Strategy is key. That's because when you're studying for the MCAT, your time is likely limited. You have things to do, whether it's a full-time job, a part-time gig, maybe even school. And that's not even taking into account all of your personal commitments, obligations, volunteering, extracurriculars, clubs, or other commitments. You want to make the most of your time. I've had the opportunity to help students with this, and this idea of being strategic with your time has helped my students get into Ivy League schools like Cornell and Yale. Instead of using every single resource available and just aiming to study every waking moment, you want to prioritize the study methods that resonate best with you and work best with your learning style and schedule. What I realized over years of working with students is how important it is to time block specific periods to study for the MCAT, and also give yourself certain hours of the day to spend time with friends, with family, work out, get adequate sleep, or get a mental health walk in. Speaking of mental health walks, we need to talk about mental health. Maybe you're a month or so into your MCAT prep and feel like your mental health is going down the drain. You rarely see your family and you can't even remember the last time you saw your friends, or your dog. Okay, maybe not your dog. And on the rare occasions that you've spent time with them, you've been in a sour mood or your mind has been completely elsewhere, so you weren't even paying attention to the conversation. Sure, there's meditation and ice baths, and I'm really not knocking those. In fact, I'm a big fan of meditation, but this doesn't replace the importance of having a strong support system. Now, this doesn't mean that you should be spending your weekends and evenings partying instead of studying at the library, or spending your study sessions analyzing the latest episode of your favorite historical romance drama, but sometimes you just want to take your mind off things by talking to someone you love. Or maybe you know someone at school who's taking the MCAT at the same time as you. It's really nice to have someone who understands what you're going through. And I know when my mind is in a good place, it helps me learn better and get more things done. Studying for this exam is hard. There is no doubt about it. And by watching this video, you are one step closer to getting into medical school and becoming a doctor. Next, did you know there's something that you can do to reach your goals even if they're challenging? To do that, you may want to check out how to trick your brain into doing hard things. Click here to learn more about how to get yourself to do something even if you don't feel like it. And if you found this video helpful, or if you enjoyed it in any way, feel free to like, subscribe, or share it with one other person who could use a boost in their journey to success. Thanks so much for watching. I will hopefully see you in the next video. Bye for now, but not forever.